Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you all are doing well and taking care of yourselves. Today, I wanted to make this video all on Kundalini Shakti, and just what it is, the essence of Kundalini. Some of you guys might have heard of Kundalini and might be a little familiar with this energy, but I wanted to make a video really breaking down and explaining what the essence of Kundalini really is. So Kundalini is a concept that is heavily spoken about in the Dharmic lineage and the Dharmic tradition. And interestingly enough, even though it's talked a lot about in the kind of yogic sciences and the yogic spirituality kind of science, it's actually referenced much more and spoken about much more in the tantric traditions. So I made a video on kind of what Tantra really is, but it actually has a lot closer ties to Tantra than it does to yoga. Of course, there is a big overlap, and it's definitely mentioned in the yogic traditions. But if you read a lot of tantric scriptures, Kundalini and awakening Kundalini and Kundalini Shakti is spoken about much more. So I just kind of wanted to share that little fact. I just found that really interesting myself when I first learned about that. So as I mentioned, some of you guys might have heard about Kundalini, especially for those of you who have been on the spiritual path for a while now. You might have heard about Kundalini awakening and what it really does to the body in terms of really kind of energizing the body and causing it to move and shake a lot. And of course, that is a huge component and aspect of what a Kundalini awakening entails. But I wanted to more so go over what Kundalini actually is and what the energy actually is. So Kundalini itself is a Sanskrit word. It's a Sanskrit term, and it comes from the Dharmic sciences. And it's a huge component and a very, very big aspect of the spiritual awakening journey, really. It's said that once you awaken Kundalini, it can be awakened many times, that you are really kind of propelled in a way and thrust and accelerated on the spiritual awakening path. It really helps, you grow spiritually a lot faster, essentially. So Kundalini is essentially a dormant kind of sacred energy that it sits dormant at the base of the spine. And the idea is that this energy, it kind of works its way up through the chakras, kind of ending at the crown chakra, the Sahasrara chakra. So again, in the yogic and tantric tradition, Kundalini is this divine feminine energy that sits at the base of the spine. So it sits at the Muladhara chakra. And it's often symbolized as a golden coiled serpent resting 3.5 times at the base of the spine. So at its core, Kundalini is a very, very powerful spiritual energy. It rises through the central channel, also known as the Sushumna Nadi. We can get into kind of what nadis are in another video. But as it goes through the Sushumna Nadi, it essentially activates each chakra, and it helps us really experience divine states of bliss, of ecstasy, and of ultimate kind of union and connection to the divine and to really everything that exists. This powerful energy is also known as our inner Shakti. That's why Kundalini is also referred to as Kundalini Shakti, because it helps us awaken that divine Shakti that we all have within us. So according to Sanatana Dharma, this energy becomes sealed in us the moment we even take birth. And it's active in both the subtle and the physical body, although it is more active in the subtle body, which is also known as the energetic body. This subtle body is also referred to as the astral body. When Kundalini rises, she ascends to meet Shiva at the crown chakra, which ultimately is going to symbolize the kind of ultimate union of the two dynamic energies that are at play within each of us. So again, in the tantric traditions, it's really important to understand this kind of concept of the Shiva and the Shakti that exists within all of creation and, of course, of all of us as a humanity. So many individuals might notice really intense transformations and shifts throughout this awakening process. It's definitely very unique to everyone, but the main thing to understand with a Kundalini awakening is that it really helps us bring about our inner creative genius, our inner potential, and really helps us, accelerate, as I mentioned, on the spiritual path, on the spiritual journey. And that's why for so many people, having this awakening is a very positive experience. And of course, sometimes there can be certain downsides. Maybe not everyone's awakening is really smooth sailing, but ultimately Kundalini is such a powerful spiritual energy that many people usually, after they experience it, report feeling so much overall spiritual clarity, and they just feel very renewed and introspective, and they experience just a lot of bliss and inner transformation that ultimately, again, helps propel their spiritual life. So Kundalini can awaken spontaneously for some, or it can awaken through really intense spiritual practice. So really intense devotional practice can actually be what brings about Kundalini for some people. So if you've already been on a spiritual journey, you've been on a spiritual journey for years, and you've been doing a lot of intense sadhana, a lot of intense spiritual work, such as, really intense meditation or really intense pranayama, and it could be any kind of spiritual practice. Kundalini can actually awaken through spiritual practices alone. It can also awaken through intense devotion and surrender, or even specific life experiences and trauma that someone may face. So if you had a lot of trauma, such as in childhood, that just became compounded over time, Kundalini can sometimes awaken through that. So, there isn't just like one size fits all on what exactly can spur and spark a Kundalini awakening, but it usually is through, various spiritual practices or certain life events. Even just clearing the chakras and the nadis and the overall energetic pathways through Ayurvedic practices, becoming a clear channel for the divine, which is what the essence of Ayurveda is about, can also help Kundalini Shakti to awaken within you. You can also be kind of granted, in a way, kind of a certain kind of powers through like Shakti type powers through an enlightened master. So this is also kind of known as a form of Diksha. You can look into that. But, Diksha alone can also help awaken Kundalini. And actually, this is a very fast and direct way to awaken Kundalini. Oftentimes, it also helps the Kundalini energy to be shot straight up through the crown chakra instead of sometimes just maybe reaching the heart. Because sometimes it's not always fully completed in a way, but kind of receiving Diksha from an enlightened master or a sage or whatever you want to call it through, physical transmission, can also be a really powerful way to awaken Kundalini as well. And actually, awakening Kundalini through Diksha can actually be one of the safest ways to awaken it. Some of the signs of a Kundalini awakening are really intense body movements or kriyas, so really spontaneous body movements. You can feel tingling in your body, maybe a lot of heat surging through the body as well. And sometimes they're more just like emotional experiences. So feelings of really intense oneness with all of creation, feeling a lot of love and devotion in the heart chakra, things like that. So these are some of the kind of like physical and emotional signs of what the awakening can feel like. But again, it's usually unique for everyone. And it is really important for all of you guys to realize that while the Kundalini awakening process can be really beautiful for most people, it can be this very blissful experience, it can also have at the same time some kind of like negative consequences for certain individuals. So for some people who don't have those kind of like really blissful feelings, they can maybe experience anxiety or panic attacks. So there can be some downsides, but ultimately a Kundalini awakening shouldn't be something to be feared. And ultimately, it can be such a powerful way for us to connect to the divine and really experience heightened feelings of awareness and of unity. So it is just important, to keep in mind some of the kind of potential side effects, kind of consequences, whatever you want to call it, that are sometimes negative. Not everyone has the most positive experience with the awakening. It can lead to, feeling really disoriented or panic or frightened. So just something to keep in mind as well. Sometimes this can happen when the energy arises too quickly or the practitioner didn't ground sufficiently, which leads me to my next point. Grounding throughout this process before and after, and maybe during if possible, is really important and can help kind of ease the process for some. I know when I had my first awakening, my body was shaking so intensely. I was going through a Hindu death meditation, which was incredibly powerful, but my body was shaking so much that it helped me to kind of just get outside, breathe fresh air, even just physically ground your feet into the earth. We hear so much these days about the benefits of grounding. You can do that, drinking some nice water, maybe like inhaling aromatherapy, just doing any kind of like somatic practices to help get you back kind of feeling in your body and experiencing body awareness, so that you're not really taken too far out there. You're not really kind of like feeling like you're blasted off into the ethers and you've lost control over your body. So grounding practices are so important. Chanting mantras or whatever, it's going to be unique for everyone, but it is important to ground yourself throughout this process, and it just makes it a lot easier. Sometimes those individuals who have more negative experiences maybe haven't developed a spiritual practice that really helped them get through it, or help them again, like kind of get back into their body whenever experiences like that arise. So find a way to help you return to center and return to your body, and ultimately just ground yourself. The more grounded you are, the more you can really integrate these spiritual insights, because Kundalini really does interact very heavily with the nervous system. So ground as much as possible, journal, do breath work, do whatever you need to ground and nourish yourself throughout the process. So ultimately, Kundalini is definitely not something to be feared. It's a really beautiful process. The awakening can be so profound and illuminating after you've gone through it. But it is important to keep in mind, what some of the kind of like negative effects of it are. So definitely don't fear it. And you can, of course, do a lot of experimentation with your spiritual practice to help awaken Kundalini yourself. I just wanted to give a little overview of what it is. It's really such a foundational aspect to the kind of dharmic healing lineage. And yeah, that's about it. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Again, I always do dharmic healing sessions, as I mentioned in my videos. So check that out if you're interested. If you want a kind of more in-depth overview on what Kundalini is, I do have a blog post on it, so you can check that out below. You can also get on my email list if you want to stay in touch. And just remember, you can't force a Kundalini awakening to happen as much as, you know, you might want to. And I know it's really tempting to kind of just really force it, but as much as you cultivate, or as long as you cultivate enough jnana, enough knowledge within your consciousness, then this process can happen a lot easier than you might think. So again, reach out if you have any more questions. There's a lot more that you can kind of get into with Kundalini. It's such a fascinating concept. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, and we will talk soon. Bye.